snippet of different services that are available to people in the community. There's going to be a lot of information in this segment. So what we want to do is have each person do their presentation, which will take about 10 minutes. And then after that, we're going to take questions from any panel member that you might have. So as people are going on, write down your questions and maybe write down what segment it was so that people know that it's more towards housing or more towards supported living or self-determination, so that after all of the presentations are over, we'll have time to try to get to a lot of different questions. Does that make sense? How that's going to work? So I'm Mike Keeley. I am the Director of Consumer Services for San Andreas Regional Center. We are an agency that goes from Palo Alto to King City, and right now we work with 16,500 families. When I started with San Andreas about 21 years ago, we had about 8,000 families. So we've more than doubled in that amount of time. We have Dana Hooper that's going from Life Service Alternatives that's going to talk about residential care facilities. We have Gina Jennings, who is from Hope Services, that's going to talk about supported living. And we have Jan Stokely that's going to talk about housing options. And then Trudy is going to talk about self-directed services. Okay, so with that, Dana, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Yes, good morning. Let me know if this is, can you hear me all right? All right, good morning. I'm Dana Hooper, Executive Director at Life Services Alternatives. I'm a parent and have been an Executive Director at Life Services for the past 10 years. I'm going to speak on the group home or adult residential facility, community care facility model. These are all names that are used to describe this particular model. I wanted to give you some perspective. Roughly 55% of the adults with disabilities 22 and over live at home. The next biggest category is almost 23%, which live in some sort of a community care facility. The third slice, which is smaller but still significant, is almost 16% with supported living or independent living services. So these are the most common models for housing and care delivery. I'm going to talk about community care facilities, and I wanted to contrast it to supported living. The primary difference is that in a community care licensed facility, you are essentially getting what I would call a complete service, meaning room, board, and care. And it's geared around that model. In supported living, it's based more on an individual model, with the individual being responsible for the housing, the supported living agency providing the care and supports necessary for that individual to be successful. There's a lot of other differences, and they'll become maybe more obvious as we hear Gina talk about supported living and me talk about community care licensing. But the high level difference is this is a group environment as opposed to geared towards an individual. And that can have good or bad consequences depending on the individual and the environment. These models, this is intended to be a 24-hour-a-day model. And unlike supported living, it's licensed by the state, community care licensing under specific state regulations. It's also vendorized by the regional center under specific regulations. There are many different kinds as well as levels, and I'll try and give you an understanding of how that plays out and makes it essentially match up with the needs of the individuals who would be living there. Typically 4 to 6 residents per facility. The service provider in order to get licensed, must control the facility. The reason that you need to control the facility is so that it's there to provide the services in over time. If you don't control the facility, well, that's just another one of those changes that could interrupt your ability to deliver services. The staffing is 24/7. The level depends on the level of the home and the care needed for the individuals who live there. Each individual still has their IEP, if a person-centered plan or whatever, this is their residential portion. The service provider is there to partner with them to be able to support them in attaining their goals.
Excuse me? Just quickly, what does IPP stand for?
Individual program plan. So simply, if you're in school, it's an education plan. If you graduated from school at some point, we just call it an IPP. Is that? In residential care model, the day portion of the day, you would go to work or go out is reserved for a day program. And so it's expected that the individual will sort that out and be part of an appropriate day program. Big deal, is it a nonprofit or is it a for-profit? I mean, I think it's important to understand what the provider's motivations are. In our case, we're a not-for-profit organization founded by family members for the provision of service in our community. Service levels reflect the needs of the individuals. So there are different levels, and it's somewhat of a complex system, but I think it's important to understand that part of exploring this option for an individual is understanding their needs and understanding how they would be provided for in a level of service. Rates are determined by the state. Staffing minimums are determined by the state. All these things are determined by essentially regulations. And within that system, you can have great care and you can have not so great care. It's a very highly regulated environment. So if you're looking at this option, part of what you need to be looking for is a great provider who's going to be around for the long term. A level 4 is the is one of the categories, and basically it's a level that's geared around how much help does someone need with daily living, how much help do they need getting around, and how much help do they need staying safe. And the more they need on those, the higher the level of the home. It's in that sense, it's linear. In reality, there's quite a bit of grayness between the levels and between whether a particular individual would thrive at this level and get this kind of supports that he or she needs. There are some levels or some individuals who need care that goes way beyond the highest level. And there are some specialized homes, and they tend to fall into two categories for people with difficult behaviors and people with enduring medical needs. LSA has 5 homes that are special for people with special health care needs, and it's a very specialized home. So, depending on the needs of the individual, there is a whole range of different options. What's good about this? Well, first of all, and somewhat I speak from personal experience, is the ability to socialize, to develop relationships with your roommates, with the people you live with. And this can be a great thing. For the wrong individual living with the wrong people, it can be like your experience might have been the first time you went away to college and lived with a roommate that you didn't choose. Could be great, could be awful. But there is opportunities for socialization. There's an opportunity to work with others, to build skills in a home environment. And it can, in fact, be like your home, not just in a physical sense, but also in a sense of the relationships, of the opportunities to grow, et cetera, et cetera. The biggest con I see is that it is a group living situation where you share resources. So you can't do what you want to do all the time, but welcome to life. But it is a shared resource. When we have a home that has 5 residents and there's 2 or even 3 staff, that's still less than 1-to-1. So in theory, if everybody wanted to go the opposite direction, we're 2 people short for supporting them. So that's what I mean by shared resources. And more resources, my presentation's up there. Different places you can go to get more perspective on this model, not just mine, but others, and etc. So thank you all.
We're going to make the transition here to supported living from Dana's presentation on group home living. And so before I get started, I just want to introduce myself. I'm Gina Jennings from Hope Services. I am stepping in today for Linda Sino, who's been with Hope Services for quite a long time. I'm the district director in Santa Cruz. Don't take those, Dana. Gosh, she's going to sit. Oh, you need to sit down. Well, that would be nice, huh? So my background, no, that's totally fine. I thought we were going to just have a quick 5-minute panel. I didn't know I could get as glitzy. So here we are. At any rate, my background is actually in residential care. I worked did an internship at Sonoma State Hospital for 1.5 years. I also worked at a small residential care program. It actually was a mini institution called Las Trompas in Lafayette, where 85 people lived, and then a few people lived in group homes. So I have a great knowledge of how that system works. I also have a brother with a developmental disability that used the array of services as well. So it's always interesting to see how things have happened. So in the late 80s, well, I don't know, Trudy, Jan, tell me, but I think it was 80s, we started a pilot project in our state, and it was called CSLA, Community Living Service Arrangements. And several advocates, people with developmental disabilities and their families, got together and said, hey, just because we use wheelchairs and we have health needs and we need nursing care, we don't always want to live with our parents for the rest of our lives. And we don't always want to live in ICF, intermediate care facilities, and we don't want to always live in nursing facilities. So can you help us out and try to figure out a way that we could live differently? And so that happened. We were actually part of a pilot project with, I don't know, I think 5 regional centers at the time got behind that pilot project. I worked at Regional Center at East Bay at that time. And then what happened, born out of that pilot project in our state, was supported living services. Happened around 1990, 91, 92. Every regional center in our state began providing the service. We've grown and changed and morphed the whole time. But supported living today is really based on 5 basic principles. And I put this over, this packet kind of over there. There's a purple sheet which gives you 4 resources about supported living. Gives you, San Andreas has information because any service starts with your IPP and your service coordinator. So you should always know that that's the place to start for supported living and any other service. Then there's a link to the Department of Developmental Services website, which talks about supported living. Gives a great 1-page kind of profile, no pun intended, about what supported living is and the broad range of services that it provides for people. Then there's another link which is to California Supported Living Network. And that's a network of providers and people with developmental disabilities and their families. And they try to keep that updated and give you pretty good information on what the service is. So, and then if you want to spend an hour and a half with Linda Sino, you can go on YouTube, and she does a really intense, long, hour and a half training on what supported living is and isn't. And it's really worth it. I mean, cooking dinner, put it on. So it's worth it there. So it's if you want a more in-depth look at supported living, you can do that. So anyway, supported living is based on 5 principles, basically. And the first principle is that you're able to live in a home of your own. You're able to live in a home of your own. You're also able to pay for that home of your own with your own resources. Pretty important distinction. So you're able to rent an apartment, a room in someone else's house. Maybe your family has set up some place and they're exorbitantly wealthy right now and they're able to buy you a home, condo that you live in. 1,000 different things happen. So housing is something Jan's going to talk about, I'm not going to talk about. But the premise is the home is yours, you're on the lease, and you pay for what happens in that home. PG&E is in your name, your landline is in your name if you have one anymore, but everything is in your name. You choose where you live and with whom you live with. And for some families, they usually gasp when I say that, because that's sometimes a big risk. I got 5 minutes. We're going to speed through this. Mike asked me if I was going to be able to do this in 10 minutes, and the answer is no. So the services are self-directed. And again, there's 5 principles of supported living. It's all over there. I'm basically reading to you. So you make decisions if you're in that services on what you want to do every day. You might want to go to a day program. You might want to get a job. You might be going to school, etc. The service is based on relationships, the circle support, and Dr. Carissa talked a lot about that today and the importance of circle support and how important it is to community living and living outside of your family home, so I'm not going to belabor that point. Services are flexible and tailored, so if your needs change, the support you receive in supported living changes, and so this is what it looks like. I support somebody who, and this is a true story, his name is Kevin, moved out of his family home, used a wheelchair, had cerebral palsy, began having swallowing issues, began having other health issues. Just because Kevin had those problems in his own apartment didn't mean that he moved back to his own family home. It meant that we brought in what we needed to be able to help him stay in his own home. Kevin had aspiration pneumonia several times. The point is, Kevin ended up leaving his family home at 30, and by 45, in his life, going through his life planning process, how he wanted his life to end based on his cerebral palsy and support needs that he had, his life, he was able to die in his own home with the support of his family and friends. So that's what it looks like. It doesn't mean you move to get care. It means that you be creative enough with your support team to be able to make it work in the community. There's 1,000 million wonderful success stories about supported living. I was able to support somebody his first year at UC Berkeley. He didn't love that the old lady was the one who got to go with him to class, but I took the best notes. So he it worked out great. He ended up dropping out of school like my daughter did. So people just enjoy lives like you and I do, make choices, hit speed bumps, road bumps along the way, and the team works together to smooth out those road bumps or drive another way. But it all happens in your own home. Did I do it in under 10 minutes? Oh, 2 left. Great, I don't have 2 more minutes. I'm going to give it over to Jan because I'm sure there'll be more questions. And again, there's a packet of information, 5 different pages, and a purple page that gives you just a list of places that you can find more information out about supported living.
Okay. Hello, everybody. I'm Jan Stokely, and I'm with Housing Choices. I have slides, which Trudy's loading, but I'm going to go ahead and start without slides in the interest of time. So Housing Choices is an organization founded 20 years ago to create affordable housing options so that people would have an alternative to remaining in the family home or living in a licensed residential care facility. So our organization focuses on the affordable housing component of living in the community. We don't provide independent living skills services. We don't provide supported living services. The premise of what we do is that the individual that you're supporting will control their housing separate and apart from their choice of service provider. So whether the adult that you're supporting needs independent living, skills services, or supported living services, they're going to need to have a home of their own outside of your family home in order to benefit from those services. And that's where we come in. To use the services of Housing Choices, you should start with an individual program plan that has a goal of living outside the family home. And once you have that goal, then your service coordinator will refer you to Housing Choices to create a housing plan and to search for affordable housing. I'm not going to describe that process today because I can't describe it in 10 minutes. But I will invite you and encourage you to come to a parent workshop on February 27th at Fremont Union High School District offices in Sunnyvale. And it's on our website. If you're interested, please come, because we're going to talk about how you create a housing plan, how you apply for affordable housing. In a nutshell, to secure an affordable place to live in our high-cost region, you need to have a plan that allows for 3 to 5 years of disciplined application and monitoring and waiting and following up. Because our region is one of the highest cost housing markets in the nation. There's not enough affordable housing for everybody. There are long wait lists. You will be successful, but you have to work at it over a 3 to 5 year period. And then once you get that apartment, the lease is in your adult child's name, and they will have housing security for as long as they continue to comply with the lease, and they'll be able to change their services around the housing as their service needs change. So it's a good option, but it takes time to realize. So our housing strategies that we focus on include creating affordable housing properties that include a certain percentage of affordable rental apartments for people with developmental disabilities. We call that inclusionary housing or set-asides. And there's a list of our existing properties over on the table. And then a second strategy that we promote is shared housing. So we support people to live in single-family homes with roommates. We call them co-ops. And with support from San Andreas Regional Center, they each have their own lease. They each have their own independent living skills provider, and we're just running the home and making sure it's a good place to live. And then a third strategy that's pretty new is called accessory dwelling units. And that may be a housing option for those of you who are homeowners. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that. Yeah, I don't see you pointing it in the right place. Okay, so inclusionary housing, we have properties with rental units set aside for people with developmental disabilities. In Santa Clara County, we currently have 15 properties, and we're supporting 250 people in those properties to live in their own place with their own individual service components. The benefits of this is we have a separate wait list for the set-aside units. So once a person gets on the wait list, we're going to support them through the wait list process and through the move-in process, which can be pretty daunting without support. The units are affordable to someone who doesn't have a Section 8 voucher. If you're familiar with Section 8, you know that the Housing Authority of Santa Clara County hasn't even opened their wait list in more than 10 years, and there are 14,000 people on the wait list. And then, as I mentioned before, the services are separate from the control of the housing. So you can move from the housing to a better housing option and keep your services, or you can stay in the housing and change your services as service needs change. And we focus on housing that's near public transit, shopping services in asset-rich communities. And we focus on extremely high quality, well-built, healthy housing. So that's that model. And I'm going to have my clicker click for me. Okay, and these are some of our properties. Basically, they're throughout Santa Clara County, from Mountain View to Gilroy. They range from small buildings with 14 units to 100-unit buildings where we have 29 of the units set aside for our folks. It's a great variety, but and we also have more coming online. So would you click, please? This is just, the set-aside model can work in... Okay, let's try this. The set-aside model works in large market rate properties. So for about 20 years, we've had 23 units at a for-profit housing site in Santa Clara. The typical apartments rent for $3,000 a month, but we have 23 that are affordable. And we have people who've lived there successfully since we opened it in 2000. We also have set-aside units in a senior housing property for people with developmental disabilities who are 55 and older, and that's a very rapidly growing part of our population because lifespans are extending, right? We have family units and we have studio units. In the family units, we support people to have roommates. So you can team up with friends and be in a 2 or 3 bedroom unit, split the cost of the rent 2 or 3 ways, and it becomes much more affordable. Okay, next slide. In the co-op homes, each resident has a lease of their own bedroom, and they each have their own ILS service, and Housing Choices has a resident coordinator. So at both the apartments and in the co-ops, San Andreas Regional Center funds us to have a person on site to meet weekly with each person in their apartment, and also to meet weekly with the property manager to make sure everything's going well. Finally, I want to talk about accessory dwelling units. This is something new that we're trying to support families to research and evaluate. If you're a homeowner, California has been changing the state laws to remove local barriers to creating an accessory dwelling unit. An accessory dwelling unit is a granny flat or a cottage. It's a separate dwelling unit that you create at your single family home. And so this is a great way to leverage the resources that you already have and create a housing option with your dollars. And if you spend the dollars, you know that the benefit of the investment will stay in your estate. So if you're interested in learning more about accessory dwelling units, we're trying to convene a parent learning community. If you're a homeowner and think that might be an option, please get in touch with me. The main issue that we're still sorting out is Well, the regional centers treat the accessory dwelling unit as a separate home. We think that they should because it's a legally separate dwelling unit, but we need to get that clarified. And then some of the cities are imposing owner occupancy requirements. So we're trying to clarify the issue of when a special needs trust owns the home, but the beneficiary lives there, that would meet owner occupancy. So lots of opportunities there. But basically, our housing strategies depend on local advocacy, and this is where you come in. Almost every single housing opportunity that I've described has come about because parents and consumers have organized in their specific community to make it happen. Can you just click on the next slide? In California, well, the Regional Center has no responsibility to pay for your child's housing, right? You're expected to pay for housing out of the child's income or your resources. But each California jurisdiction, each city or county in California has a responsibility to meet the local housing needs of its entire community, including people with developmental disabilities. So they have responsibilities to address the housing needs of our community, but they don't really know much about our community. We're pretty invisible to city council and to planning commissions and to people who make decisions about affordable housing. So we are really working hard with support from our regional center to help our consumers and their families have their voices heard in local decision making about affordable housing. So if you're interested in that, go on our website, fill out an interest form, and help us advocate for more housing opportunities for our folks. And your voice is very powerful. I have to stop. Because of your roots, relationships, when parents turn out, when consumers turn out, you have a really big impact. But we need you to turn out and make a difference for affordable housing. And lots is going on right now in your community, so it's a good time to get connected. And what else? What's the last slide? We have very active parent groups working in Palo Alto, Sunnyvale, Mountain View, Cupertino, and Santa Cruz to get housing commitments. So if you're interested in being part of that, please get in touch with us. Even if you're not ready to make a decision about housing, subscribe to our e-newsletter, because every month we're providing really in-depth discussion of housing issues. We're providing case studies of a whole great range of people who are living successfully in community housing. So subscribe to the newsletter, get inspired. It may not be the right time now, but start thinking about it. Thank you.
Okay, so I'm going to talk just briefly about parent-directed supported living. And my daughter's been in supported living for almost 15 years. She's 34 this year. And we were with an agency for 3 years, and it was going well. And there were just a lot of challenges. It was early. I had very high expectations, as all of us should. And I wanted to be highly involved. And at one point I decided that I'm doing so much of the work and I'm not always thrilled with what's going on. I think I'll start my own agency and manage her services myself. And so I did that in 2011. And we launched 2011 of April, and I've been doing it ever since. So we've completed 11 years of providing services and supports for just my daughter. Don't call me and ask me to take your kids as a client, because on my weekends off, I'm not staying at your house with your kids, okay? So, it's an option. Now, I'm in my early 60s now. I'm starting to plan for retirement. I did get vendorized just like any other agency would. They have the same level of expectation from a parent vendor as they do from any agency that approaches them. One of the differences between a parent-directed organization is you cannot become a nonprofit, so you can't make donations to your own agency. And you still pay the $800 a year in corporate taxes. That's the biggest difference. What I can tell you is none of the supported living agencies are making bank off your kid. And I hear that from families when they call. They're making so much money off my kid. And I'm like, no, they're not. And they've reduced the average rate. So it's very difficult for agencies to support your child and do a really good job given their funding. So those agencies need your support if they're providing services to your child in whatever way, by hosting a fundraiser, or maybe donating furniture, or getting involved somehow. With the vendorization process, which was really the hardest part of doing this, I had a lot of support from Tom Yetter and from Mike Keeley in doing this. I created a template for families to use if they want to write a service design. It's available on my website at journeyofchoice.com. All of these sheets that you have, may I use yours, Cindy? This is for you to write notes. This is your own note taking in case you forgot paper. But during this session, if you have a question for somebody for this panel, write it down and then come get in line to ask your question. We'll do that in a couple of minutes. I'm working on a transition plan. I'm currently mentoring one of my daughter's staff to take over the agency if we continue it when I retire. So we always have to be mindful, as I was in my 50s when I started, a lot more energy than I do now. Okay, and so we have to be mindful of our own transition plans as we're doing supported living or ILS or any of those kinds of services for our sons and daughters. We need to have a plan, a succession plan for ourselves, and it's never too soon to start considering that by looking at options like residential care homes, like supported living services through other agencies, through ADUs that Jan's talking about. And so I just wanted to add that caveat that if you say, nobody can meet the needs of my child like me, you're absolutely right, And if you want to do it, you can do it. You can work with the regional center and become vendorized. But it's a lot of responsibility. It's a lot of work, and they have the same expectations from you as an individual as they do from all the agencies. And they really do their best to help support you along that path. I'm going to turn this over to Mike now, who's going to talk about self-determination. How many of you have heard of self-determination? So about less than half of you. So he's going to enlighten you, and then we will take your questions. So as Mike begins to wrap up his 10 minutes, you can line up right by that divider in the room and go that way, so we're not blocking access to people being able to see Mike.
Thank you. So how many of you have heard of self-determination? How many of you are still waiting for it? Okay, you must, because you probably heard about it a long time ago.
3.5 years ago.
So let me talk to you a little bit about this. Let me get another show of hands. How many of you are pretty new to regional center systems? Okay. And how many of you have been familiar with the system, regional centers, for quite some time? All right. So what I'll do is, as I explain this is going to be new to almost everybody. But as I explain it, I'm going to try not to use letters and things like that so everybody can follow along. What this does, what self-determination does, is kind of like the title. First of all, this is the handout that I'm using, and there are more on the table in case you didn't get one. This is an abbreviated version of what we're going to be doing later on. We're going to have informational meetings. So this is a smaller version of it. Self-determination is a new program in California that allows more flexibility for services, supports, who helps the person, where the person goes in the community, and who spends time with the person. What does that mean, more flexibility? How many times, if you've been with regional centers for a while, did you have a vendor and you thought, this vendor is okay, or maybe they're not the best, but I know somebody that would really work better with my family? Has that ever happened with you? Or the regional center says that it's okay to purchase this item, but not this other item, and this other item would work so much better. Have you ever encountered that? Well, that's what self-determination is about. There is the ability for the person and their family and their friends to take control over the services that they use. The person and their family and friends can select the people that they use, whether they're a vendor of the regional center or not. They can select the different purchases to help that person along in the community. Why is this taking so long? 3.5 years ago, why are we still waiting for it? Because the services have to be approved through a federal process. And that's what's been taking a long time. There are lots and lots of different services, as you know, that it takes to support a family. And each one of those services has to be approved, at least the general category of them. So there have been questions back and forth, and finally, they're down to 1 or 2 questions that need to be answered. And once those couple of questions get answered, then we can move forward with the process. So there are 5 principles of self-determination: the freedom to plan your own life and make your own decisions, authority on how your budget is spent for your services and supports. Imagine that one, because a lot of times you don't have the choice of where that budget is. But this time you do get to decide how the budget is spent. Support, you get to choose your own paid and unpaid services and supports. Responsibility for the decisions you make, and confirmation to make decisions in your life by designing services that you can rely on. Those concepts are terrific concepts that allow a person to have a good life. They also count on a lot of responsibility. So there are lots of different steps that people will need to take if they're going to participate in this program. Let me talk to you just a little bit about how some of this might work. The first part would be something called an independent facilitator. This is where someone does a pre-planning meeting where they can prepare for your individual program plan with the regional center. So you get together and you talk about what are the different services that you need, what are things that you like, what are things that you don't like, who do you know that might be able to help you out with this. Let's put this all together so that when we meet with your service coordinator at the regional center, we have a plan already, and we can kind of outline it more clearly. That's what the independent facilitator does. It's somebody that is independent of providing the services. So you wouldn't want somebody that's going to be doing a respite service or a day program service to be your independent facilitator, because they're not really independent. They might have another interest. Once you get that part done, you go through the regular individual program plan process where you meet with your service coordinator and the planning team and talk about the different things that are needed to support your child. Through that process, you have a budget. And that budget is really important because it's going to tell you how much money you get for the year to spend on different services. And it'll kind of be divided into different categories. How are they going to determine that budget? How are you going to know how much money you're going to get? That budget is determined by the amount of money that was authorized for you the previous year. So that's how they look at the budget. Now, there's a couple of things to think about with that. What if you had respite authorized the previous year, but you couldn't find a provider, so you didn't get to use the service? So those things would be taken into account. If you would have used the service, but it wasn't available, we can incorporate that into the budget. Also, there may be one-time things. Maybe one-time things that you used the year before that wouldn't be counted, or one-time things that you're going to use this next year that you might need. An example of that might be a bathing chair or some sort of adaptive equipment that you don't need every single year, but for a particular year you might need it. So you get the budget, you sit down with your planning team, and you say, these are the different services that I'm going to need, and you move forward with that. How are you going to manage that budget? How are you going to make sure that the people working for you are the right kind of people? How do you know how much taxes to take out, or how to write the paychecks in the proper way? All those different things. The third piece of this is that there is a financial management system that people use that will help them with all the payroll pieces of that. The financial management system is the only required vendor that you use. A vendor is a person that has gone through the process and is kind of like a vetted agency. So you will use a financial management system to help manage your budget so that you know that the people have the right fingerprint clearance and they have first aid training if they need it, and that they're paid properly. So you use your financial management system. Then you're ready to proceed with your self-determination program. You find the people that you want, you put together the services, you might adjust things as time goes on. Your financial management system helps you with the payment of different people, and you're able to get the support in a very individual way that you might need. So, is this going to be available to everybody? Not really. For the first 3 years of this program, once it starts, it's available to 2,500 people across the state of California. How did they decide 2,500 people? How did they divide that up amongst regional centers? They kind of looked at the size of the regional centers. So San Andreas Regional Center has 126 people that we start with for that first 3 years. How do you know whether you will be one of those 126 people? How is that going to work? The very first thing that you'll need to do is, if you're at all interested in self-determination, you want to go to an informational meeting that the regional center is going to conduct. And the very last page, I think, on your handout has a whole bunch of different informational meetings that the regional center is going to provide. During that, it's probably going to be a couple of hours or an hour of presentation, maybe an hour of questions. During that time, we're going to go through each of the things that I talked about in detail. If people are still interested in self-determination after going through that information meeting, then we will get a list of names and we give them to the Department of Developmental Services. From that list, the department will randomly select people to participate. We are right now collecting an interest list of people that have heard about self-determination and want to potentially participate. Interestingly enough, we have 126 people on that list. So my expectation is that we will get more than that are eventually interested. And then move forward with the informational meeting. Then we give the names to the department chooses the people, and then they can continue with self-determination. How are we going to do the questions? I think questions are going to be over on this side. So if you have your questions.
Quick, it says Spanish. You do offer it in English also?
Oh yes, they will all be in English. But we have people there that will be speaking Spanish and Vietnamese, and we will use headsets also for people. So all of the presentations will be primarily in English, with the exception of one that's not listed there. And then, but there will be Vietnamese and Spanish translation available. And the materials are also in different languages.
Does this apply to all the area regional centers or just San Andreas?
It applies to all the regional centers. So there are 2,500 people that are going to be selected. San Andreas has 126. If you're part of another regional center, they will have a different number, kind of depending on how big they are.
Thank you.
So, and then after the 3 years, it's open to everybody. Why do you think they're doing that for 3 years? Well, there might be some bumps along the way.
Because the 20 years pilot program.
The 20 years wasn't enough, right? Okay. Hopefully, does that give you a really broad brush overview of what self-determination is?
Excuse me?
Okay. Yes.
If your child already has San Andreas services and you have a person dealing with her case, how does this help?
Okay, so then we'll get the questions over here. So self-determination will be available to anybody who is an ongoing regional center consumer. That means over the age of 3, so not early start people. So over the age of 3, you will still have a service coordinator. You'll still be part of the regional center system. It's not that you go away from San Andreas or East Bay or Golden Gate. You're still part of the regional center. It's just that instead of choosing the regional center vendors, you get to choose who you want to provide the services, and you manage your own budget. Let's start with the